On the edge of a sprawling city, behind tall gates and walls lined with ivy, lived a man named Edward Hayes. Edward was one of those men people whispered about, an untouchable figure, a self-made millionaire whose empire was built on real estate and sharp deals to the outside world. He had it all: glass towers bearing his name, cars that shimmered under the sun, and a mansion so large it needed an army of staff to keep it alive. Yet, inside, Edward was a man alone. His wife had left him years ago, taking their only daughter with her. Friends weren't really friends, only associates, bound by contracts and money. Edward buried his emptiness under work, under possessions, under the illusion that success could quiet the ache in his heart. Among his staff was Maria, a middle-aged maid with gentle eyes and a quiet presence. She had been with Edward for nearly 5 years, moving silently through the grand halls, polishing the marble, and keeping his world in order. Edward barely noticed her most days. She was part of the background, like the chandeliers or the carpets. But one rainy evening, something changed. Edward had just returned from a meeting, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp and cold. He dropped his briefcase on the couch, distracted, and when Maria quietly approached to take his coat, he realized she was trembling. Her face was pale, her hands unsteady. "Are you all right?" he asked, more out of obligation than concern. She hesitated, then whispered, "Yes, sir, I'm fine." But she wasn't. Edward noticed the redness in her eyes, the way she pressed her lips together to hold back tears. Something inside him, something buried for years, stirred. "Maria," he said slowly, "what's wrong?" And that was all it took. The dam broke. Through sobs, Maria explained that her youngest son, Daniel, only 8 years old, had been rushed to the hospital. He needed urgent surgery. The cost was far beyond anything she could ever afford. She had been working 2 jobs, saving every penny, but it wasn't enough. She didn't want to bother him, didn't want to ask, but the truth spilled out, raw and desperate. Edward stood frozen. For a moment, he thought of dismissing it. After all, people had their own problems, didn't they? But then he saw the anguish in her face, the same kind of anguish he had felt years ago, when he lost his family, when he realized money couldn't buy back love. Without a word, Edward reached into his wallet, pulled out his black credit card, and placed it in Maria's trembling hands. "Take it," he said quietly. "Do whatever you need." Maria's eyes widened in shock. "Sir, I can't." "You can," Edward interrupted firmly. "Your son's life is worth more than numbers on a screen. Go." She clutched the card, as if it were a lifeline, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, sir, thank you." The next day, Edward expected the obvious. A massive hospital bill. Medical costs. Perhaps debt paid off. It didn't matter to him, he was prepared for it. But when Maria returned the card, something unexpected happened. She handed him a small envelope, along with the receipt from the card's usage. Edward frowned, curious. He opened the receipt first, and what he saw made his breath catch. The charges weren't just for hospital expenses. Yes, the surgery was there, but there were also purchases that puzzled him: children's clothes, school supplies, a stack of books, a modest laptop, and even groceries. Confused, Edward opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. In shaky handwriting, Maria wrote, "Mr. Hayes, I can never repay what you've done for my son. The surgery saved his life. But when I held your card, I realized this was more than money. It was trust. I used it not only for the hospital, but also to buy things my children have gone without for years. Clothes so they wouldn't be ashamed at school. Books so they could dream bigger than I ever did. A laptop so they can learn and grow. And food, real food, so they don't go to bed hungry anymore. I'm sorry if this disappoints you, but I wanted to give my children a chance at a life I never had. Thank you, not for the card, but for the kindness you showed me. You didn't just save my son, you gave us hope." Edward's hands trembled as he finished reading. For the first time in years, tears welled in his eyes. He thought of his own daughter, now a stranger to him, growing up without his presence. He thought of the emptiness that had haunted him despite all his wealth. And he realized that Maria's purchases, the simple, humble things, were not selfish at all. They were acts of love. The credit card hadn't been used for luxury. It had been used for dignity. For dreams. For a better future. Edward closed his eyes, overwhelmed. The millionaire who once believed money could solve everything finally understood what it meant to give, not to buy affection, not to impress, but to truly change a life. That evening, Edward drove Maria to the hospital himself to visit Daniel. The little boy's eyes lit up when he saw his mother walk in with Edward behind her. Daniel whispered, "Mama, the doctor said I'm going to be okay." Edward knelt beside the boy, smiling through tears. "You're going to do more than be okay, Daniel. You're going to grow up and do great things." In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by machines and soft beeping, Edward felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. Purpose. From that day forward, Edward didn't just remain Maria's employer. He became her family's silent guardian. He made sure Daniel and his siblings had scholarships, that Maria no longer worked herself to exhaustion, and that their small home was secure. And in return, Maria gave him something priceless. She reminded him of the humanity he had lost, of the love he had buried. The millionaire gave his maid a credit card. But what she bought didn't break his bank account.